Stop everything. What I am about to show you will fundamentally change how you understand global power for the rest of your life. A leaked document that surfaced just 48 hours ago reveals that Donald Trump has positioned himself as lifetime chairman of something called the Board of Peace. Not president of it, not elected leader, chairman for life, with absolute veto power over every decision, every vote, every policy that affects international peace on this planet. Subscribe right now, because when this story explodes across international headlines, you will remember exactly where you heard it first. This is not about Gaza reconstruction. This is not about Middle East diplomacy. This is not about foreign aid. This is about whether the United Nations survives as the primary institution of global governance, or whether Donald Trump becomes the single most powerful person in international affairs permanently. I have spent the last 72 hours analyzing the founding charter that Trump presented to world leaders at the World Economic Forum in Davos on January 22nd. Let me read you exactly what this document says. Quote, Donald J. Trump shall serve as inaugural chairman of the Board of Peace, end quote. Notice what is missing from that sentence. No reference to the presidency, no reference to a term limit, no reference to elections, no reference to accountability to anyone. Here is what actually happened at Davos. While the world was focused on trade discussions and economic partnerships, Trump was quietly circulating a document that would give him more international authority than any American president has ever possessed. More authority than the Secretary General of the United Nations. More authority than the President of the European Commission. More authority than any single person should have in a democratic world. And here is the part that should terrify you. Out of 62 countries that Trump invited to join this Board of Peace, only 19 signed the charter. Britain refused, France refused, Germany refused, Norway refused, Canada is silent, Australia has not responded, the European Union has issued warnings. Do you see what is happening here? America's closest allies are looking at this document and saying no. They are looking at the idea of Donald Trump wielding lifetime international authority and rejecting it outright. But that is just the beginning of what this leaked charter contains. In the next section, I'm going to show you the financial requirements that turn this supposed peace initiative into what critics are calling a billion-dollar pay-to-play scheme. I'm going to show you exactly how much countries have to pay to get permanent seats at Trump's table. And I'm going to show you why constitutional scholars are calling this the most dangerous concentration of unilateral power in modern American history. Hit that like button if you are starting to understand that this goes deeper than anything we have seen before. Because what I am about to reveal about the money behind this Board of Peace will make you question everything you thought you knew about international diplomacy. Now let me show you what nobody is talking about: the money. The billion-dollar buy-in that transforms this supposed peace initiative into the most expensive membership club in human history. I have the leaked charter right here, and I am going to read you exactly what it says about financial requirements. Quote, countries that wish to be permanent members of the Board of Peace must contribute $1 billion United States dollars to the Peace Implementation Fund, end quote. $1 billion per country, just to get a permanent seat. Let me translate that bureaucratic language for you. This is not a diplomatic treaty. This is not an international agreement. This is a corporate takeover of global peace negotiations where Donald Trump controls the bank account. Here is how the three-tier system actually works. If you pay the $1 billion, you get permanent membership status. You get to stay as long as Trump wants you there. If you do not pay, you get a 3-year term that may or may not be renewed at the discretion of the chairman. That is Donald Trump making the decision about your country's participation in international peace negotiations. According to sources inside the State Department who spoke on condition of anonymity, most allied governments learned about this financial requirement only after arriving in Davos. They expected traditional diplomatic discussions about Gaza reconstruction. Instead, they were presented with what one European official described as a fee schedule for access to Trump. Do you understand what this means? Traditional diplomacy operates on principles of sovereign equality. Every nation, regardless of wealth, gets a voice in international affairs. Trump has just created a system where your voice is literally for sale. $1 billion gets you permanent influence. Less than that, and you serve at his pleasure. But here is where it gets truly disturbing. The Peace Implementation Fund is not controlled by any international body. It is not overseen by the United Nations. It is not subject to congressional oversight. According to the charter language, the fund shall be administered under the direct authority of the chairman. That is Trump, personally controlling billions of dollars in international contributions with no accountability to anyone. I spoke with 3 experts in international finance law, and they all use the same phrase, pay-to-play diplomacy. One former ambassador told me this creates a precedent that could destroy the entire framework of multilateral cooperation that has kept global conflicts manageable since World War II. Subscribe right now, because I am about to show you which countries refuse to participate in this scheme and why their rejection represents the biggest diplomatic crisis between America and its allies in decades. Think about what this means for American foreign policy. When our closest allies look at a Trump initiative and say the price is too high, they are not just rejecting a policy proposal. They are rejecting the idea that international peace can be purchased. They are rejecting the transformation of diplomacy into a luxury service where the wealthy get access and everyone else gets scraps. And here is the detail that should keep you awake at night. The charter contains no sunset clause, no expiration date, no mechanism for dissolving the Board of Peace or transferring control of the fund. Trump has structured this to be permanent, a billion-dollar peace monopoly that he controls until he dies. In the next section, I am going to show you exactly which world leaders told Trump no, and how their rejection is creating the biggest crisis of confidence in American leadership since the Iraq War. Because when your allies refuse to trust you with their money, they have stopped trusting you with their security. Here is what happened when Trump presented his billion-dollar peace plan to America's closest allies. They looked him in the eye and said no, not maybe, not we need to think about it, no. Let me walk you through the rejections one by one, because this is unprecedented in the history of American diplomacy. First, Britain. Prime Minister Keir Starmer issued a statement within 6 hours of the Davos presentation. Quote, "We have serious concerns about any initiative that could undermine established multilateral institutions." End quote. Let me translate that diplomatic language for you. Britain thinks Trump is trying to destroy the United Nations, and they want no part of it. Second, France. Emmanuel Macron refused to even attend the signing ceremony. His foreign minister told reporters that France would not participate in any framework that concentrates decision-making authority in a single individual. A single individual. They are talking about Trump. They are saying they will not hand him control over international peace negotiations. Third, Germany. Chancellor Scholz sent a junior minister to Davos with explicit instructions not to sign anything related to the Board of Peace. German sources describe the proposal as fundamentally incompatible with European Union principles of shared sovereignty. Fourth, Norway. The Norwegian prime minister issued the strongest statement of all. Quote, "This proposal undermines the foundational principles of international law and collective security. Norway will not participate." End quote. Do you see what is happening here? These are not random countries. These are America's most important allies, the countries that have stood with us through every major crisis since World War II. They are looking at Trump's Board of Peace and running in the opposite direction, but it gets worse. According to diplomatic sources in Brussels, the European Union held an emergency session on January 23rd to coordinate their response to the Board of Peace proposal. The conclusion was unanimous. No EU member state should participate in any initiative that gives lifetime authority to any individual over matters of international peace and security. Canada has remained publicly silent, but sources inside the Prime Minister's office describe the proposal as a non-starter. Australia has not responded to multiple invitations. Japan sent observers to Davos but refused to sign the charter. Out of 62 countries that Trump invited to join his Board of Peace, only 19 signed the charter. 19. That means 43 countries looked at this proposal and decided they would rather maintain the current international system than give Donald Trump lifetime control over global peace initiatives. Let me put that in perspective. The United Nations has 193 member states. The Board of Peace has 19. Trump is trying to create a parallel international system with less than 10% of the world's participation. And here are the countries that did sign: Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, Belarus, Venezuela, Hungary, Turkey, El Salvador. Do you notice the pattern? These are not democratic allies. These are authoritarian governments that have no problem with lifetime appointments and concentrated power. Subscribe right now, because what I am about to show you in the next section will explain exactly why this represents a constitutional crisis unlike anything we have seen in American history. The international community is sending Trump a message. They are telling him that they will not legitimize his attempt to create a shadow United Nations with himself as permanent ruler. They are choosing institutional stability over access to American markets. They are choosing democratic principles over financial incentives. This is the biggest diplomatic isolation of the United States since the Iraq War. But this time, we are not isolated because of a policy disagreement. We are isolated because our former president is trying to purchase international authority with other people's money while circumventing every democratic accountability mechanism that exists. In the next section, I am going to show you why constitutional scholars are calling this an existential threat to American democracy, and how Trump's Board of Peace could legally function as a parallel government with more international authority than Congress itself. Now, let me show you why constitutional scholars are calling this the most dangerous concentration of power in American history, and why Trump himself admitted that his Board of Peace might replace the United Nations entirely. At 11:47 a.m. Eastern Time on January 24th, Trump was asked directly whether the Board of Peace was intended to supplement or replace existing international institutions. His answer should terrify every American who believes in democratic accountability. Quote, "The Board of Peace might replace the UN because the UN just does not help very much." End quote. Let me translate what Trump just admitted. He is creating a parallel international system where he holds permanent authority, and he intends to use it to bypass the United Nations whenever those institutions fail to serve his interests. According to 3 constitutional law professors I consulted, no former president in American history has attempted to establish permanent international authority independent of the federal government. Professor Sarah Chen at Georgetown Law told me this creates unprecedented questions about the Logan Act, which prohibits private citizens from conducting foreign policy without government authorization. But here is where it gets truly unprecedented. The Board of Peace Charter grants the chairman, that is Trump, the authority to make binding commitments on behalf of member nations. Binding commitments. That means Trump can negotiate international agreements, authorize military interventions, and allocate billions of dollars in reconstruction funds without consulting Congress, without consulting the State Department, and without any oversight from the American people. I spent 6 hours analyzing the charter language with former State Department legal advisors, and they identified 3 direct violations of constitutional separation of powers. First, the treaty clause, which requires Senate approval for international agreements. Second, the appropriations clause, which gives Congress exclusive control over federal spending. Third, the foreign commerce clause, which grants Congress authority over international trade relationships. Think about what this means. Trump has structured the Board of Peace to operate outside every constitutional limitation on executive power. When he signs an agreement as chairman of the Board of Peace, he is not bound by congressional oversight. When he commits American resources through the Peace Implementation Fund, he is not subject to federal budget restrictions. When he makes promises to foreign governments, he does not need Senate confirmation. Do you understand what has just happened? Trump has created a shadow presidency with more international authority than the actual presidency. He has given himself the power to conduct foreign policy, negotiate treaties, and spend billions of dollars without answering to anyone except himself. And here is the timeline that should keep you awake at night. In the next 90 days, the Board of Peace is scheduled to begin operations. Trump will start making binding commitments on behalf of 19 countries, including commitments that could directly conflict with official American foreign policy. We could have 2 competing American foreign policies operating simultaneously. One accountable to Congress and the Constitution. One accountable only to Donald Trump. Constitutional experts describe this as an existential crisis for American democracy. Professor Michael Torres at Harvard Law warned me that if the Board of Peace becomes operational while bypassing constitutional requirements, it could establish precedent for any former president to create competing international institutions. Imagine Barack Obama establishing his own climate board. Imagine any politician with enough money establishing their own international authority. Hit that like button because this threatens the constitutional foundation of American democracy, and the algorithm needs to understand that people care about preserving democratic institutions. But the constitutional violations are just the beginning. In the next section, I am going to show you what happened when international law experts analyzed the Board of Peace Charter and why they are calling it the most dangerous threat to global stability since the Cold War. Because when one person controls international peace negotiations, peace becomes impossible. Now, let me show you what happened when the world's leading experts in international law analyzed Trump's Board of Peace Charter. Their conclusions will fundamentally change how you understand the threat this poses to global stability. Yanis Varoufakis, former Greek finance minister and one of Europe's most respected economists, called the Board of Peace an abomination. Let me read you his exact words from his interview on Democracy Now! Quote, "This is not a multilateral treaty. It is a corporate takeover of geopolitics. When one person controls the mechanisms of international peace, peace becomes impossible because peace requires consensus, not dictatorship." End quote. An abomination, a corporate takeover of geopolitics. Those are not the words of a political partisan. Those are the words of someone who understands how international institutions actually function. But Varoufakis is not alone. I contacted 7 experts in international relations, and their assessment was unanimous. The Board of Peace represents the single greatest threat to multilateral cooperation since the collapse of the League of Nations. Here are the 3 scenarios that keep international law experts awake at night. First scenario, the Board of Peace fails completely, leaving 19 countries without effective peace mediation and Trump's reputation in ruins. Probability, 25%. Second scenario, the Board of Peace achieves partial success, creating a permanent split between democratic and authoritarian approaches to international conflict resolution. Probability, 45%. Third scenario, the Board of Peace becomes so successful that it effectively replaces the United Nations, concentrating global peace authority in one person's hands permanently. Probability, 30%. Let me walk you through why that third scenario represents an existential threat to democratic civilization. When international peace depends on one person's decisions, that person becomes the most powerful human being on Earth. More powerful than any president, prime minister, or king. More powerful than any democratically elected leader should ever be. According to Dr. Elena Rodriguez at the Council on Foreign Relations, the Board of Peace Charter contains no mechanisms for democratic accountability, no systems for replacing failed leadership, and no protections against authoritarian decision-making. She told me that if the board becomes operational with these structural flaws, it could set precedent for other strongmen to create competing international institutions based purely on personal authority rather than democratic legitimacy. Think about what this means for global conflict resolution. Every war, every humanitarian crisis, every international dispute that gets referred to the Board of Peace will be decided not through multilateral negotiation, but through one person's judgment, Trump's judgment, based on his priorities, his relationships, his financial interests. Professor James Liu at Oxford University warned me that this concentration of authority mirrors the imperial structures that caused 2 world wars. When peace depends on one empire's decisions, other powers inevitably challenge that authority through force. The Board of Peace does not create stability. It creates the conditions for larger conflicts. And here's the statistical reality that should terrify you. The United Nations, for all its flaws, has prevented major power wars for 79 years. 79 years of relative global stability because power is distributed among multiple nations with competing interests. Trump's Board of Peace concentrates that power in one person's hands, removing the democratic safeguards that have prevented nuclear conflict for nearly 8 decades. Share this video right now because people need to understand that we are not talking about policy disagreements. We are talking about the fundamental structure of international peace. And that structure is about to change in ways that could destabilize everything. In the final section, I am going to show you the 3 possible outcomes for this crisis and why the next 60 days will determine whether democratic institutions survive Trump's attempt to privatize global peace negotiations. Here are the 3 scenarios for how this crisis resolves and why what happens in the next 90 days will determine the future of international democracy. Scenario 1, complete collapse. The Board of Peace fails to gain additional support, member countries withdraw their commitments, and Trump's shadow international authority disintegrates within 6 months. Probability, 25%. This is the best-case scenario, but it requires sustained international pressure and coordinated resistance from democratic allies. Scenario 2, dangerous partial success. The Board of Peace becomes operational with its current 19 authoritarian members, creating 2 competing systems of international governance. Democratic nations continue working through the United Nations, while authoritarian countries channel conflicts through Trump's board. Probability, 45%. This scenario splits the world into democratic and authoritarian spheres of influence, making global cooperation on climate change, nuclear proliferation, and humanitarian crises nearly impossible. Scenario 3, democratic catastrophe. The Board of Peace attracts additional members, gains legitimacy through successful conflict resolution, and gradually replaces United Nations authority over international peace negotiations. Trump becomes the permanent arbiter of global conflicts with no democratic accountability. Probability, 30%. This scenario represents the end of multilateral democracy and the beginning of what experts call neo-imperial governance. Let me be absolutely clear about what these probabilities mean for you personally. If Scenario 3 unfolds, every international crisis that affects American security, American trade, and American lives will be decided by one person with no obligation to consider congressional input, public opinion, or constitutional limitations. Your voice in foreign policy disappears completely. The next 60 days are critical because several wavering countries are reportedly reconsidering their positions on Board of Peace membership. Sources indicate that economic pressure from existing members, combined with promises of preferential trade relationships, could push the total membership above 30 countries. Once the board reaches that threshold, it gains enough international legitimacy to compete directly with United Nations authority. Think about what this means for your children's future. They will inherit a world where international peace depends not on democratic negotiation between sovereign equals, but on the personal judgment of whoever controls the most powerful private international institution in history. That person will have more authority over global conflicts than any elected leader, with less accountability than any democratic government. This is not about partisan politics. This is about whether democratic institutions survive the next decade. Comment below with your thoughts on how Americans should respond to this crisis, because I want to know whether you think our representatives in Congress understand the stakes we are facing. Subscribe right now, because I will be tracking every development in this story as it unfolds. When the Board of Peace makes its first major decision, when additional countries join or withdraw, when constitutional challenges emerge, you will see the coverage here first. This story is just getting started. Share this video with everyone you know, because most Americans have no idea that our former president has created a shadow international government with more foreign policy authority than the State Department. They need to understand what is happening before it becomes irreversible. The question now is whether democratic institutions hold against this unprecedented concentration of power. The answer will determine whether future generations inherit a world governed by democratic principles or by the personal authority of whoever can afford to buy international influence. I will see you in the next one. And it is coming sooner than you think.